So welcome everybody to today's NTAC, National Training and Technical Assistance Center webinar entitled Advancing Our System of Care, Supporting Students, Teachers, and Parents as Schools Reopen. So a small disclaimer here, this presentation was prepared as part of a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA. While the opinions expressed in the presentation are not the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA, we hopefully that the information that is shared today will be helpful to you from our experts. And also a slight security statement here. If for some reason there are any security issues during today's session, we will immediately end the session and send out another join link so we can continue on a different link just in case anything happens. So part of our project's multidisciplinary team, as you can see here, we have multiple partners with different expertise that we all coordinate and combine to provide all of these wonderful resources and trainings for you. As our main goal of the project is that all children, youth, young adults, and families with or at risk for SED and SMI can access evidence-based treatment and recovery services in a well-coordinated system of care. So while we do try to focus our trainings for these following audiences, of course, all of our trainings and resources and technical assistance is open to anybody who needs them. But part of our funding is that we do have to focus on these particular audiences here. So if you're one of them, welcome. If you are somebody outside this particular cross sector, we're glad that you joined us as well. And speaking of services, we have multiple ones that we offer to everyone: individual consultation, peer learning exchanges, coaching. We'll hopefully be doing some more training academies, communities of practice, podcasts, all kinds of things. So you can always access our website and see everything that is available to you. So with that, I am going to pass it along so we can get started on the main part of today. So with that, I will pass it along to Mr. Jeff Bostic to get started.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and we're very grateful to be here today. I'm Jeff Bostic. I'm a child psychiatrist down in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University Hospital, and I'm also part of the WISE team. WISE stands for the Wellbeing in School Environments Center. So we work predominantly with schools, trying to help them as they navigate mental health issues with students. And I'll pass it over to Aaron Raykow to introduce himself.
Thank you, Dr. Bostic. My name is Aaron Raykow. I'm a clinical psychologist and director of operations, also for the WISE Center here at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. And I'll turn it over to Pat.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's a delight to spend the afternoon with you. I'm Pat Hunt, the Executive Director of FREDLA, and we're delighted to be part of the National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Jane Walker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Walker, and I am Senior Advisor with the Family Run Executive Director Leadership Association. I'm a family member, been caring for a daughter with mental health needs for a very long time, and have been a part of the family movement for more than 30 years, actually. I'm happy to be with you.
Great. So we're going to show just a few slides to kind of like provoke some thoughts and to stimulate the discussion here, but all four of us will be contributing relatively equally to thoughts on this, and look, of course, very much to your participation as well. And again, please feel encouraged to use the chat box as you go if you'd like to type in questions or thoughts or share items with us as we go, because this is for obviously everybody here. All right, Joanne, I think we're ready to advance to the next slide. And this, of course, is just to provide clarity that we are here focused on system of care. That's really our overarching principle that we follow. And so that's big things like we want to ensure that all of the services that we pursue or try to advance are driven by families and their needs and what will be relevant and important to them. We also want, of course, everything to be based on individualized, strength-based, and evidence-informed practices. We similarly want the participation of youth. We'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. We want to be culturally and linguistically sensitive and thoughtful about all of the interventions that we describe. We want to do everything that we can to try to keep people in their communities and provide them in the least restrictive environment. We wish for things to remain community-based and integrated between all levels of care within a community. We wish them to be accessible to everybody. And we would like for there to be much collaborative coordination across all of the interagencies that are working with kids in our area. All right, next slide, please. Just want to mention, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, that COVID has had a very profound impact on our world. It's been 188 countries that have been shut down, if you will, due to what's going on with COVID-19. 90% of kids have been out of school at least for some interval of time. And of course, during that time, less care has been accessible to most children and families. We've seen that domestic conflict has gone up, but there's been this notion that, well, things are going smoothly, but they're not going so swimmingly. We know that because kids are not going to school and not engaging with other people out there, that sometimes child maltreatment is not being detected in the same way as it were before. And we know that much anxiety has shifted from families on social emotional needs to much more basic things like, do we have food? Do we have a place to stay? Do we have job security so that we can remain in the community where we are? Next slide, please. We know that there are profound national trends as well, that young kids are really struggling. Again, this was a high school age survey, that 25% of them, was actually a little greater than that, felt disconnected from peers and adults. Over half were concerned about their family's physical health, and many kids have dealt with family members becoming ill, even dying, and that's of course been traumatic for everyone involved. And then we find that a number of kids are struggling with difficulties with sleep, feeling distraught. Now loneliness has emerged as a big factor. Just this past week in another very large study in Chicago, such that, again, we know that kids are suffering as a result of being apart from their friends, being out of school, and so forth. And again, we've seen that a good 40% of kids have reported that they've just not felt like they've had the support that they had before, and it's been rough on them. Next slide, please. I'll just mention also, of course, that the parenting stress has been profound. And again, we're seeing that the vast majority of parents, it's really been about 3 out of 4 parents have said that it's been difficult to very difficult. And the other fourth, 1/4, 25% have said, well, it's about as expected. That's not to be confused with it's good. That just means that it's still been a not necessarily easy time, but they've struggled mightily, of course, just logistically with trying to juggle their own job circumstances as well as parent their children and frankly teach them as well. So it's been a heavy load that they've worked with. We also know that people who have had more economic adversity, and we also know that other groups such as people of color have struggled more during this time to get access to care and to services. Next slide, please. Again, we just mentioned that, again, a large number of families here have reported difficulty. And again, we've seen a number of idiosyncratic kinds of things here as far as what families have reported to us about trying to both work simultaneously and to look out for their children. And it's just been a very heavy load for everybody. Next slide, please. We know that teachers also have struggled with this mightily. They weren't really prepared to teach virtually in the way that everybody had to do it immediately, of course. And so that we see that their teacher satisfaction is down about 25%, and about 1/3 of our teachers are looking at transitioning to potentially other occupations. Again, the pandemic has had profound effects on how they've had to try to teach and work and keep up with everything. All right, next slide. And again, this may be a little bit hard to read, but the point of the story to this slide primarily is that teachers have most reported that they felt ill-equipped to do things that would engage students. And we've all struggled in districts across the United States and beyond to find ways to keep students engaged. And teachers constantly speak about how children will come on to the screen, but nobody knows what they're really doing. And I just literally spoke an hour or so ago with a school district where they were working with kids, and we were talking about the academic decrements, because we're finding that 75% of kids are getting less than 3 hours a day of actual instruction, actual school-related tasks that they're working on this past year while they've been out, so to speak. And the point is, the teachers are like, I'm not sure what to do to engage them better. I can't see them on the screen, but again, as reported a couple of hours ago, one of the school staff was reporting that kids, I don't think they've been keeping up really with math and science this year. I think they've gotten better at doing TikTok videos and other things like that. So again, that means that in a very concrete way, we know that kids are going to return to school when they're live on campus all the time, and they're going to probably, for the most part, be behind. It's not realistic to believe that they're all going to come back and be fully ready as though they've had a regular 9th grade year or 7th grade year or whatever it might have been. Okay, next slide. All right, so I think here we'd like to do two things. First, we would love to get the input of Pat and Jane from Fredla, but also we'd love to hear from you in terms of what you are seeing as the current concerns or stressors as families are trying to get ready to return to school. I'm going to turn it over first, I think, here to Pat, and we'll go from there.
And Jane will join me now as well. Thank you. Jane, you want to start?
Jeff, I think you did. I mean, it's overwhelming, isn't it? And one thing about the past year, it's been a universal experience. So often, regions have experienced, weather crisis, something like that. But this has just been so universal that it has not left anybody untouched as a result of the past year. I feel like every person on this call could be a presenter, a co-presenter in telling their story. So, to put kind of faces and children to the numbers that you talked about, and the anxiety level of children is so heightened, and for numerous reasons, what we're hearing. And I think one example that I encountered just in the last week was a student who had been out for, well over a year, since last March, going back, and the anxiety she had walking into the building because she couldn't find her locker. She was terrified to walk into the lunchroom because she didn't know if she was going to be sitting at the same table that she had sat at, the year before, and wondered if she was with the same lunch group that she had before. Her anxiety was so heightened that she wrote a letter to the principal, an email, and the guidance counselor, and said, I can't come back. And the school actually has allowed her to remain virtual, but obviously that's going to happen at some point, that she's going to have to come back to this school. I'm not making any judgments about how that situation was handled, but I think it illustrates that the anxiety is coming from the simple things that kids may have done previously, but now after this year of isolation, the anxiety is so much more. Sometimes the anxiety is also coming from worry about safety. I mean, how much have we heard about the worry about social distancing and masks and hand wash and everything else, and the concerns about going back to a classroom. And I was speaking with a mother about a week ago, and the school system had reopened, and within 2 days, the school was closed again because 19 cases of COVID were discovered. And so now the children are back on virtual learning. So the anxiety over safety, coupled with the uncertainty of, are we in school? Are we back on our laptops? The whole instability of the situation has elevated anxiety. And Jeff, you sure mentioned the isolation and kids worrying about coming back and being with their friends. Do they still have the same friends? I was so touched again by another mother whose kindergartner was the first time about a week ago back in school. She had not been in school the whole first year of kindergarten. And the school had arranged for one morning when all the kids would be outside. And I think the response of this little girl says it all. The mother at the end of picked her up at lunchtime and how did it go? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say? And the little girl's first response was, well, it wasn't a 10. And the mother was like, oh no. And the little girl said, it was 100. I'm so happy to be back. And she wanted to go back the next day. She can't. She's not going back for another week for the rest of the year. So just that whole loss of socialization. And then for those kids with any concerns about social skills, that whole having to reconnect again. And then it goes without saying the loss and grief that so many families have experienced or
Jane, you're on mute. I don't know how you got there.
I have no idea. So
Good
I was,
again.
thank you. So just the loss of loved ones or the worry about loved ones who have been ill, and then the inability to grieve, where a family member in my family died and was raising 2 of his grandchildren. And so they have not been able to grieve at all. They're going back to school as of a few weeks ago. And I think to myself, what a critical role those teachers have in those children's lives right now, because their whole world has been turned upside down. So I want to give a special shout out to the teachers who might be on this call, who are, in my view, heroic this past year in terms of how they have had to be themselves so flexible and have been so concerned about their students' well-being in the course of the last year, and yet many times have been juggling concerns in their own families. Jeff, you mentioned the academic loss. That's certainly a big one, but particularly at different points, milestones for kids. We know lots of kids have been applying to college this past year. That's really been a major issue for some kids, and kids transitioning, whether it's transitioning from elementary to middle to high school, that too has raised a lot of academic concerns. I could go on and on. We all know the stories. We've heard them, but more importantly, we probably have experienced them ourselves. And so, Pat, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, families have, I think, been struggling about how to continue to promote resiliency during this time, particularly when you think about what it takes, the inside strengths, the learned skills, and the outside supports. And when we've been so focused on surviving, or do we have enough bandwidth that everybody in the house can, the adults can work and the young people can attend school? And there's been so many frustrations, and I think financial concerns as well around pieces like that. Families are concerned about the changing requirements. Some states have decided to lessen their requirements, and it gives great concern to parents about where their young people are going to be as they enter either compete for higher learning opportunities or trade schools, or enter the workforce. Where is that going to leave young people who are transitioning to the more adult phases of their life as well? And I know the Journal of American Medical Association in 2021 reported 40,000 children experienced a parent dying of COVID. And, I'm old, okay? And I've lost a few friends this year, not even to COVID. But I'm thinking about if I were young and I had lost my parents and I didn't have those types of daily connections and supports, that had been so important in my life. I can envision even how complex that is, or how complex it is for, for the parents who are continuing to raise their children after they may have lost another parent. So I think about that, but I also think about, we talk about heroes. I think our children are experiencing something nobody else has experienced. None of us have experienced that. And that they continue to move forward says so much to me, and I think should give us all hope. And however we can continue to support them in that, we need to think of. I'm going to look. We've had a couple of comments come in the chat box. David said he'd like to share a free resource for promoting positive childhood experiences. Bumper stickers are a unique and powerful way to educate people. Thank you for sharing that, David. The challenge is the way we're communicating, threat-based messaging versus safety-based messaging. Everybody's thanking David in there. I thought we had another one earlier. I'm not sure I can scroll up to it though.
Well, Charlene,
Yes, virtual exhaustion for educators, families, youth, and the impact on learning. An increased number of juvenile justice challenges, increased risk of suicide, and increased number of domestic violence. Thank you all for putting your comments in the chat. Go ahead. Didn't need to cut you off.
No, I was going to echo the same thing. So thank you, Charlene. Meanwhile, I think while we're thinking about other things with this, and please continue to put things in the chat box, Dr. Raycal will describe some of the things about how to talk to kids as they prepare for this next phase. So we'll turn it over to Dr. Raycal.
Thank you, Dr. Bostic, and thank you, Jane and Pat, for your feedback and helpful insights as well. And thank you all for continuing to engage in the chat. Please continue to do so throughout the course of our remaining time here. We've got about 20 minutes or so left in this presentation. And I want to hear from each of you, or as many of you as feel comfortable speaking about some of the big topics that we have begun to discuss today. This is a toe in the water approach. So if you would like additional information about any of the things that we're talking about, please reach out to us at NTAC or at our respective organizations, and we can talk more about these important issues. Next slide, please. So I want to transition now to the what can we do about it section of our talk this afternoon. And I'm sure that this is at front of mind for everyone. Next slide, please. One of the biggest things that we're focusing on here is how can we create school environments for individual children to transition back into that feel safe, both for the educators as well as for the children involved. Next slide, please. This is not rocket science. I want to start with that, but these are the 4 tenets that we work on a lot within our center. And again, Dr. Bostic and I represent the WISE Center. We're in Washington, D.C. We support about 50 schools a year through our work. This is our day job. And those schools are predominantly about 95% BIPOC population of students. There is a large percentage of students within the schools that we support who are living in economically disadvantaged communities, who food scarcity and housing insecurity have been major factors for them. So the bottom line is that we see a lot of chronic stress and trauma within the populations that we work within. So it's with that as a backdrop that we then think about how we can further support this transition for those students coming into the fall. And these things may translate to some of the work in organizations and students and families that you work with across the country as well. This is not rocket science, but these actually are extremely transformative interventions that we use a lot and can actually have a real difference in changing the landscape. Things like non-contingent acknowledgement, reflective listening, imitating and describing actions, and responsiveness to basic needs. I want to get more into these things in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Before I do, though, I want to talk about this critical importance around cultural differences, and a critical component of building this reentry plan and supporting a trauma-informed community and school is to recognize that there are obviously very clear cultural differences, experiences, interpretations, and responses to trauma that we have all been through as a society over this past year. And for students who are seeking help after a trauma, your school or the organization or the educational group that you represent has to ensure that responses of school staff are culturally appropriate. So schools need to work to actively counteract the effects of historical trauma, societal oppression, including implicit and explicit biases, institutional oppression, including eliminating disproportionality and punitive and more exclusionary or out of school disciplinary practices. And really at the tier 1 level, this starts with professional development. This is an example today, what you all are engaging in around that, although it is a very much toe in the water approach, there is much more content behind what we're introducing today. And I'm sure that many of you have already been thinking about this, but it also comes in the form of supervision from school personnel who are infused with strategies for understanding cultural perspectives and traditions of students and their families, as well as strategies for actively counteracting the effects of both implicit and explicit bias at an institutional level and in individual interactions. So connecting with community partners who can enhance this cultural responsiveness and support cultural brokering is what we often refer to it as, is really a priority. And then next, the school really needs to review its policies and procedures to identify and address standard practices that may be adversely or disproportionately impacting specific groups of students and could potentially be exacerbating traumatic stress or loss reactions. And in doing so, really our hope is that the school also pays attention to particular cultural practices of families, such as disciplinary practices, in a manner that protects the student while also respecting and understanding the cultural framework of the family. And then finally, there's evidence-based practices that you heard Dr. Bostic refer to earlier that need to be adapted to the students and families that we all support in this work in an attempt to reduce stigma and increase effectiveness of service utilization. So again, cultural brokers are key to this, and cultural brokers, by that I mean they're members of the students community that are tasked with translating cultural practices for schools, and also really can engage with the school to act as a bridge between the school and community, especially when a family is reluctant to engage in health or trauma-informed services. So interventions such as this recognize and address the impact of traumatic stress that can result from societal oppression such as racism and xenophobia and homophobia and sexism. Next slide, please. So with that as a background, I see you, I hear you, you're important. It could not be more simple, but this intervention is incredibly powerful. All kids want to be acknowledged. All kids want to make sure that they are loved and are not going to be able to reach that level of self-actualization beyond that unless they feel safe and loved. So we spoke a few minutes ago about non-contingent acknowledgement, which includes reflective listening, imitating and describing actions, responsiveness to basic needs. Some of you might be saying, I'm not going to do this myself or endorse that every child for every little thing gets an acknowledgement. And your response to those colleagues of yours could be, guess what? This kid's 4, this kid's 8, this kid's 15, regardless, they're still learning. They don't yet have a solid internal motivation or reward system. They've been through an incredible amount of stress and strain over the past year. And this is how we help them develop that healthy neural functioning. And also, wouldn't it be nice if your boss acknowledged you more, right? So would you possibly work harder for them if you did? There's no harm in this. No kid is above this. Their brains are developing in roughly the same way. If they can't get acknowledgement in positive ways, guess what? They're going to do it in negative ways. And the perk here is that if you can do this to describe the desirable behaviors more often, there's less time for those undesirable behaviors. Next slide, please. So when it comes to non-contingent acknowledgement, to go into this a bit deeper, in a nutshell, this is essentially describing exactly what you see. This is acting as that play-by-play announcer sometimes that you might hear in a sports radio broadcast of a sporting event. The purpose here is to notice the student, and that is it. When we feel noticed as humans, guess what? We feel important. And even if we are not always doing the right thing, so make sure that we're noticing for the positive things as well as for the negative. We often say we want to catch our kids being good. And this will often result in the child being more mindful of their behavior and complying without being redirected every single time. Next slide, please. We also want to ensure that we are validating and replacing these important behaviors, but validating the reaction is really important here. And so the message is what you just did, throwing that chair across the room, is not okay, but you're feeling angry right now is something that I can handle as a classroom educator. You are accepted here unconditionally. We have unconditional positive regard for your presence here in this classroom. I am not going to send you down the hallway. I'm not going to send you home. We're going to figure out a reparative action around that chair that was thrown across the room and around that friend who might have been hurt. But I'm not going to give up on you because you're safe here and you're not too much for me. Next slide, please. So we want to be responsive. We don't want to be reactive. This is my point. We want to be monitoring our own reactions. And this is an important new environment for all of us that we're in, especially moving into this fall. But it's an important part of helping kids adjust and feel safe, as well as not heightening their level of anxiety or trauma. So we want to discuss the guidelines ahead of time. We want to tell students that they are there to be a member of this community, and our job is to keep them healthy and safe. We want to avoid jumping to the "that's not safe" or a similar redirection every single time a kid gets close to that line. And instead, we want to be replacing with language that is around something that is more effective as a strategy for them to do. So for instance, have a discussion ahead of time around, this is new for all of us. We all might forget at times. And if you see me or others, or you notice yourself getting too close to this line or forgetting to keep our mask on, let's remind each other, no one will get in trouble. It's all just here to help us remember. These are small things that we can do to help our kids feel more engaged and safe as they enter into the fall semester. Next slide, please. So I want to turn it over to you all for a moment. You've heard from the four of us, and we've shared some of our thoughts. There are about 25 of us here right now, and I know that each of you have been thinking about different kids or colleagues or other educators that you might work with directly or indirectly, or yourselves in your place of work. I want to ask you all this question, and I want you to feel comfortable enough to turn off your mute button and to speak up about this. How can we best hear the concerns of our kids, families, teachers as we resume schooling? That's my first question to all of you. Who feels brave enough to answer that question for a moment?
I will. I'll offer a little opinion here. I feel like there's still a lot of stigma around it. And once we really start to embrace how to effectively take the stigma around some of the challenges that we face, we'll be able to affect more families, for them to really see a parent-teacher connection as collaborators, as help, as resources, and that directly affects the children in the classroom and how they interact as well. So a lot of the things that they may see may be learned behaviors, learned stigmas, learned reactions and conditions around some of their experiences. So I think if we can tackle how to take away the stigma, we're making a step in the right direction.
That's a really insightful comment. Thank you for sharing that. And I think so much of the reason that we do the work we do in schools, and all of you are interested or involved or professionals within that setting as well, is because there's a huge opportunity within a school setting to be able to leverage the inherent trust that a family and a child has in a school to do right by the child. And we can leverage that trust to be able to broker a conversation, to be able to broker a relationship, to be able to support collectively this huge need that we all see right now in our society. So that's a really great point, and I appreciate that. Other thoughts to build on that, or other thoughts altogether around how can we best hear the concerns of our kids, families, and teachers as we resume schooling this fall?
Erin, this is Jane, and I think Leora had a great comment in here about while there is a lot of of negative going on, there is a lot of strength-based going on as well, and that leadership within schools is far more tuned into the social, emotional well-being and elevated grief of our students, and that caregivers have been more in relationship with providers than ever before, and schools are more tuned into home life of their staff and teachers, which I think is probably also a higher level of awareness as a result. But I think those are excellent points to point out in how to hear the concerns that are you mentioned.
And I'll amplify that Dr. Charlene had also made a really good comment in the chat box about how our messaging can sometimes feel like it's threatening versus safety-based. And so it's important to empower kids with like things to continue to do, again, whether that's social distancing or other things, so that again, they have some sense of normalcy or control in their life. I think that's very helpful. And at the same time, also, Cynthia made a really astute, good comment about how kids are smart and they notice that their grandparents and parents and extended family members are struggling. And that's frightening to them. They look for like reflection of like, are things okay or not? And so the point is that I think we're positioned, as just has been mentioned, we're reaching out to families more to equip them with some stress management techniques, and specifically like, are the families modeling, if they don't have an answer for a situation, how to problem solve through it for the kid? Like, yep, we are having a problem with getting our electricity right now. So here's what we're going to do to try to fix that. And that may also include their social supports. Who else are we going to turn to? Who else is having success with this? So while it's a difficult time, I think families are looking for strategies from us to equip them with ways to navigate real problems that they're facing that were unexpected.
Thank you, Dr. Bostic. And I'm going to turn it over in the sake of time back to Dr. Bostic, who's going to do a few more slides before he turns it back over to our colleagues to finish things up here.
Yep. And we'll just do a couple of things here about some of our strategies for trying to navigate this back and forth virtual schooling versus face-to-face schooling that we're all contending with. It has been exactly what was identified before, which was schools will say, we're going to go back. And then they plan to, and sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes the needs of the students are like, I don't feel comfortable going back yet. So it's not like virtual schooling is going to immediately go away and everybody's just going to resume school the end of this year or September, and it'll all be like, thank goodness that's all behind us. That's not really realistic. So what things can we think about as we're dealing with, quote, hybridization in all its forms? So we'll go to the next couple of slides. We'll go to the next slide. Joanne, thank you. We can go one more. Okay, so I just want to mention that there's a couple of really good things out there. There are measures that we can use to help kids get a safe, soft landing as they go back to school. There are very simple measures that can be used. There are free ones. I like that David put it out before. Anything that we can get for schools that's free is always advantageous. There's a, for example, website called www.closegap.org, and they have a series of like both manuals and instructional activities for teachers to use to help, again, make a soft landing coming back. There's also just very simple procedures that people can use, like having the kid come in when they get back and identify on a daily check-in kind of way, like, this is who I am, this is my mood today, I'm happy, I'm bored, I'm confused, whatever it might be. And then what's leading to that so that they can articulate a little bit more. And then maybe a question or two about, so what is my school plan for today? What is my broader activity plan for today? And do I need someone to reach out to me because I'm confused or behind or I don't understand stuff? So literally like 5 questions, not 15, but like 5 things so that families can be equipped again with what to do with their kids coming back home, but also that the kid and the school can receive adequate amounts of support. I'll just mention that again, similarly, we're trying to think about ways to advance things with restorative practices. Again, mindfulness activities as kids come and start back. We'll get back to Dr. Rakow's point, kids communicate and their misbehaviors communicate, and thinking about that again from a restorative point of view, rather than this kid's just being difficult and bad things need to happen, is real important. So again, any sense of normalcy that's appropriate and routines, a very helpful kind of opportunity, and opportunities for students to be heard in all this. I'll also mention, again, a shout out to Michigan. They have a program called trailstowellness.org. Again, this is free resources, and they have lots of materials for teachers, including manuals for running various types of groups, again, like in these early morning kind of check-ins or conclusions in the afternoon. So there's plenty of free things out there that should be accessible. Next slide, please. I thought a really unusually hard thing has been families have tried to like take over the teaching role. And we found a few things that make this a lot easier. If instead parents can be identified or positioned to look for the things that the student is doing well from the teacher can point out where the child is doing well or not so well and amplify those rather than feel like they've got to teach everything. The parents don't have to teach everything. That helps. You know, we've all learned that if we leave the kids to their own devices, they can get too many screens going on in too many places. By that, I mean, there could be the computer screen, but also the peripheral brain, the cell phone that with TikTok or God knows what, you know, kind of actually ends up being more what kids look at. So making sure that parents are passing back and forth or that we know what kids are really doing can be very helpful. And again, routine is not just for turning on your computer from 9 to 3 or 9 to 12, but also when you're going to do assignments, when you're going to actually read, when you're going to show that to family members or other people so that we know that it's actually going. And then another thing is reaching out to the other parents. You know, we've seen students be in pods, but parents also can reach across these pods. And it's like what's working here and there can be very helpful for parents during this really stressful time. Next slide, please. There have been a few things that we found out about virtual schooling. Like, of course, when people have consistent access to consistent Wi-Fi that actually works is real important. You've got to have resources where it can be quiet. And this is not easy to attain. What does this mean? It may means that we're looking at further hybridization where some kids will be working at school because it's a better place for them to be able to work, even if they're not going to be doing conventional schooling in the way that we had anticipated. Okay, next slide. And again, I want to emphasize from the beginning to the end, we have to be thoughtful about cultural differences in this. What do we mean concretely? Sometimes people understand COVID as a punishment, and we would not ascribe this to any of course, cultural group, but some families come from religious frameworks where COVID, you know, represents something difficult. And the point is, it's not that one is right or wrong, but rather we just want to understand from their point of view what both COVID represents to them, why they've had the adversities that they've had. And again, one of our successful coping with stress strategies is to reframe things. I wonder why, you know, this has been on your path, that you've had this adversity or that can be a helpful way for people to kind of shift gears a little bit. But again, the big point here being that we want to always be sensitive to the fact that people come from a variety of circumstances and they have very different needs, sometimes very basic, that need to be addressed before they can focus again on trying to keep up with the reading assignment. All right, next slide, please. And then finally here for our own discussion, are there school practices that people are seeing thus far that they would like to shout out or give kudos to so that again, we can share those amidst ourselves? And I'll let other people talk here now.
Jeff, this is Pat. I just can't help but think of some of the things that you've mentioned this afternoon that have been so powerful about, you know, that positive reinforcement and really, you know, engaging with one another and supporting our young people. I think remembering to do that for one another as well is important. And I think as parents and their relationships with teachers and other professionals at school, you know, how that works back and forth as well. Parents have been hugely stressed. Teachers have been hugely stressed. And to just take that moment and stop and say, boy, together, look what we're doing. And how can I help you do more? How can I reinforce this? How can I support that? To really keep it a two-way street. I think a lot of that has been missing the last few years. So I think when we talk about protective factors, you know, that's how we surround our kids with even more of that. And if we model it, they see it, and we'll do it with one another as well. So thank you for your insights today.
Couldn't agree more with you, Pat. And another topic that we'll be talking about in coming months will be teacher well-being. We've done a fair amount of work on that. Multiple of us have. And so we know that that's going to be a real important topic, particularly as we ready up for trying to resume more conventional school stuff. I know that our time is up. I would like to turn it back to Joanne to indicate a couple of other activities. Please don't hesitate to put anything else into the chat, and we'll be glad to try to respond to it. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us at any point for any kind of support that we might be able to provide or help that we can provide.
Hi, thank you, Jeff. So if anybody has any additional questions or comments for any of our presenters here today, if you'd like to enter them into the chat box or unmute yourself, come back on and ask or make any comments that you would like. We'll give a couple minutes here for that before we close things out. So feel free to unmute or post into the chat box.
Hi, my name is Carol Pratt. I am a family peer support partner. And one of the things that I heard today that I think is so super important is the empathy towards the parents. Sometimes it's being reflected in what's happening at school. So I think it's really important that that's being acknowledged. Some kids don't know how to verbalize what is happening between home and between school and the stress that's involved on everybody. And I think that's important, and it's an important focus on whether what homework is getting done, whether what schoolwork is getting done, families who have children who are not connecting. And at some levels, parents we're experiencing parents having negative feedback because of that. But I heard a lot of positive today, and I hope that continues, because the parents are working as hard as they can to do so many things, and it's good to hear. Unfortunately, some schools are not getting that message, but it's good to hear that it's being put out there. So I wanted to thank you for that.
It's a great point you bring up, and if the parents aren't on board and feeling supportive, we often think about when you get on a plane, right? You've got to put your own oxygen mask on before you put it on the child sitting next to you. So if we're not taking care of ourselves as adults, we're not going to be able to support the kids in the room either very well. One of the things that we do at the Y Center is called, to build on your point, Caregivers Empowering Each Other. And this is a support group that's moderated by a mental health professional and a community parenting advocate or broker from the community. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for parents to be able to connect, share their experience, and feel validated and heard by their peers, not just by a professional, and to get evidence-based interventions under their belt for how to improve things at home, whether they be behavioral or anxiety-based or something else. This is a curriculum that we're happy to share with others if they're interested. You all can reach our team, which Joanne just informed me it's okay that I put this up. So I'll just put in the chat box our website, which is medstarwise.org, and we're really happy, in our role both through NTAC, but also in our day jobs, to be able to support you all in thinking about how at least we do some of these things, especially around caregiver support, and happy to consult with you on those issues.
And I thank you, Aaron. I think also to always remember some of the best resources for families out there, particularly families who may be struggling with their own children's mental health needs. As we've heard, there's such a huge population right now who are struggling, all of us in one way or another probably. And so is to connect with those family-run organizations in your state, your county, whoever's the closest to you, because there's a lot of great information there. They also very often sponsor supportive environments, whether it's online or, probably mostly online right now, of families connecting to other families who have similar experience or who have service needs or who just plain old don't know where to go anymore. And so reaching out to family-run organizations is powerful. So thank you.
Right, so, and I apologize, I was thinking that we ended at the hour, but it was a few minutes ago that we were to end. So I apologize for running over here. But thank you everybody for their comments and sticking on with us for a few more minutes. So we do have multiple upcoming events as part of the INTACT project. The PowerPoint was sent out to everybody in the reminder email today. So you can access all of the upcoming INTACT events there, or you can go to the website at the bottom of the slide there. You can access all of our resources and trainings there as well. So thank you so much for attending. We appreciate you coming and joining with us and contributing to the discussion. Thank you to Jeff and Aaron and Pat and Jane for presenting today and sharing your expertise. A reminder, a follow-up email will go out immediately following this session, and in it there will be a link to a survey. If you could please take a few minutes to fill that out, return it to us. It helps us for quality control and learning what you need for future trainings, and it's also an important part of our continued funding to be able to keep bringing you these free resources and trainings. So with that, all of our contact information is also in the slide deck. If you need some additional TA assistance, you can access any of our social media channels or contact anybody at our TA Center. So thank you again. The session was recorded. It will be available in a couple weeks on our website. So with that, I will go ahead and close things out. So thank you again, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.